In the Pocket number 5.
Even though I may have played a song 5,000 times, for much of our audience, it's their first time. I approach it like it's the first time that I've ever played the song, and it's the last time I've ever going to. Everything is on automatic pilot. Everything that I do is intended. I think quite often we put the term pocket and we give it to the drummer, but that pocket is manufactured by musicians that are playing in that pocket. Maybe we're giving the responsibility to one person, whereas everybody needs to claim responsibility for that. If you're hearing the drums, then you're outshining the music and you're not doing your gig. And I think that that's a lot where the pocket comes in, is knowing where you fit in. Saturday Night Live is just something that's really tough to get into. And when you do it, the world wakes up to who you are. If you took all that stuff away from me, those were never the motivating factors behind why I play drums. Even though that I've had a lot of success and a lot of wonderful things happen to me, it's really irrelevant. What's important is that I've been able to do something I love for a very, very long time. I'm just happy to be able to do what I do. I get to play drums. Like, how awesome is that?
Thanks for tuning in to the In the Pocket Radio Podcast. I'm Frank Sardella, and I'm your humble host. Get ready for another episode where we get to the bottom of the groove with interviews, exercises, and advice to put you, the drummer, right where you belong. So join me now, right here, In the Pocket. Yes, another episode of In the Pocket Radio. It's Frankie Pockets here with you at Frankie Pockets on Instagram. And I did promise you great episodes to come, and I'm really excited about this one. If you haven't listened to episode 4, you should definitely go back to that one and listen to Dennis Conton. That was really a great interview with him. And another odd, bizarre, quote-unquote coincidence for me. As you know by now, coincidences do not happen to me. But this particular guest came from an arbitrary post on Facebook, 2:30 in the morning, couldn't sleep. I always get up and work and do things, and I happen to be on social media. And here I find this video from this band that I knew from the 90s. And when I played this cut, I was like, that guy is in the pocket right there. I need to find this guy. And I took the next hour and a half and went searching around the internet to find him. And here we are today with him on the show, which is awesome. My guest today is described on his website initially not as a drummer, but as a, quote, happy guy. I'll talk to you about his career as a drummer. And as it says in his bio on the website, few would define him so narrowly. He can be found recorded on at least 25 albums. Those recordings are with everyone from local upcoming artists to mega artists such as Crash Test Dummies, 11 million records sold worldwide. Very impressive indeed, which he has been a member of since 1991. With many of these recordings, you'll also find him in the credits as producer, engineer, or both. 3 Grammy nominations, a Juno win with 11 of those nominations, appearances on Letterman, Arsenio, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, and a most proud moment, Saturday Night Live. A Prairie Music Award, 3 nominations, and almost 20 years of touring the world over, is still touring to this day. A recent Crash Test Dummies tour about to kick up on the West Coast. As a matter of fact, I'm a little disappointed. My timing is always perfect, except for the fact that I just missed him in New York last fall. But that's okay. I'm thinking of heading up to Toronto for an upcoming show. He's a featured performer and educator at the Cape Breton Drum Festival. Not once, but twice. The Montreal Drum Festival, Victoria Drum Festival, and Vancouver Drum Festival. A principal educator at the M&T Drummer Summer Camp in the Black Forest of Germany. The only North American to be there 4 years running. A touring clinician for Sabian cymbals, Pearl drums, Vic Firth drumsticks, and Remo drumheads. And featured in several drum magazines around the world, including the cover of Drums Etc., Canada's Prime Drum Magazine. I'll have to check that one out. Even I haven't heard of that one. You can find his writing contributions in Canadian Music Magazine and on Miles Yonk's motivational site, 5 Star Productions. You'll find him in the credits on the Staying Alive webpage, a site devoted to children's safety with regard to fire. From creating the music to the philosophy of the PSAs to the conceptualization of The Great Escape created by Jeff Dara. I could go on and on with this bio, and I'm just going to put it down because, as usual, I'm going on, and I'm just so excited to have him on the show here. So please welcome here to In the Pocket Radio, Mitch Dorge. Mitch, you are in the pocket.
Hey, Frank. How's it going?
It's going pretty good, man.
That's quite an impressive list that you just read off.
I know. Can you believe it's you? Is that surreal when you hear that bio read that you've accomplished this much in your career?
Believe it or not, even with the list of credits and the list of accolades, and the accolades have never been what motivated me. I mean, we got to do like a lot of really great stuff, and as you said, playing Saturday Night Live for me was quite possibly the pinnacle of our career anyway, because I just view Saturday Night Live as, that's just something that's really tough to get into. And when you do it, the world wakes up to who you are. But all of those things were things that I took in stride. And if you took all that stuff away from me, those were never the motivating factors behind, why I play drums. That's why when W5 came along, you were looking for people that had achieved happiness, but they were supposed to be under the age of 40. I was over 40 when when they came knocking at the door. But the only reason they came knocking at the door is because a lot of the people that I work with, and some of them in the film industry, like for doing movie scores and stuff like that, they came in looking for these people, and they would say, "Hey, if you talk to Mitch Dorge," and something that a lot of the people that I work with, something that they always brought up was the fact that going for trying to get the awards or winning prizes or doing the major shows and all that stuff was just never the motivation behind doing what I do. I'm just happy to be able to do what I do. I get to play drums. Like, how awesome is that?
Unbelievable.
You know what I mean? And I get to do it every day of my life. To me, just having the privilege of being able to play and the privilege of some of the people I get to play with, and that's just a major thing. And so I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to do those things and to be in those situations. But more than anything else, I'm happy that I get to play drums all the time.
Just the inspiration factor alone, not only inspiration for me, and I'm sure everyone listening, but it sounds like you're just very inspired by your own existence and your playing and what you get to do. And I think I'm having a realization here, Mitch, because you can get so much into the technical, but I think you made me realize something about myself and my playing. That inspirational factor, that happiness in playing, I think may give us a little insight into what that really consists of. People who play in the pocket tend to have that inspiring quality about them coming from the music and emanating out from them. So,
you know what, I have to say, right from when you first contacted me and you were talking about the whole pocket thing and something that's hard to define, I have to say that from what you've just reflected onto me just now, I think you're right that it has a lot to do with it. A lot of the guys that I know that are really great pocket players, and the word pocket's elusive. Why I would frame it as being elusive is that I think quite often we put the term pocket and we give it to the drummer, and that's someplace that the drummer is supposed to hang out. But really, that pocket is made or it's manufactured by the musicians that are playing in that pocket. And, you might have a drummer that's really in a solid pocket with the metronome. But if the bass player is playing way behind, or if the bass player is playing way ahead, or if you got the bass player that's behind the guitar player that's ahead, that pocket really gets played with. And I really find that every situation that I've ever been in, when I have musicians on stage that are listening to me as much as I am listening to them, all of a sudden that pocket just grows. It just becomes this thing that you can drive a Mack truck through. And, and I wouldn't solely credit the drummer with that responsibility. I really do think it comes from everybody that's on that stage.
Wow.
And, when everybody has a solid sense of time, and I'm not talking about metronomic time, but just in terms of like where they sit in the music, that's where the pocket really gets huge. Because I was thinking about that, and some of my favorite drummers that I listen to, and I shouldn't say favorite drummers, because if you asked me who my favorite drummer was, the list would be way, way, way too long. We'd be talking for months on that.
Yes. Loaded question.
Yeah. But, it's that combination of musicians that are really creating something big on stage. And the pocket is usually set up by how well everyone's listening to each other. And I think that's why it becomes really elusive, because sometimes people are trying to find the pocket. And maybe we're pointing and we're giving the responsibility to one person, whereas everybody needs to claim responsibility for that. I don't know. Would you agree? Am I just barking here?
Wholeheartedly. As a matter of fact, that was one of my purposes in creating this show. Just being obsessed with the pocket and always like, if you can get a drummer to be able to recognize that pocket when he sees it, he can really drive it and maintain it and take responsibility to lead it. And so I think you hit it on the head there, the fact that it doesn't come down to one person. I also think, Mitch, that you just took a lot of pressure off a lot of drummers by saying that, because, that tends to put pressure on you as well. And that, nothing can wreck a good pocket like pressure or stress or too much thinking. Dennis Cotton, our last guest on the show, that's one of the things he said is about, he talked about maintaining the pocket by getting relaxed and being confident and starting to feel and using things as a gauge, like noticing the other musicians and, or people tapping their foot or they're dancing or moving to, something. Is it working? Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Real quick, I want to ask you about something. If you could tell us what you meant by W5, was it?
W5 is a Canadian journalistic network. W5, who, what, where, when, how. They do documentaries, and they did a happiness documentary. I think it aired in Canada. Mm-hmm. And what they were looking for were people who had achieved true happiness in life. Mm-hmm. So W5 were the people that sought me out. They interviewed 8 people, and I think 5 of the 8 people had asked them if they had spoken to me.
Wow.
So that worked out really well.
Yeah.
Actually, you were saying something. I just want to bounce off something that you just said, taking the onus off of the drummer. Maybe one more thing that might give a little bit of definition to the pocket. I've never really been a drum solo guy. And what I mean by that is, if it's just a display of chops and you're playing everything that you know how to play and you play it really fast and that kind of a thing, in general, it bores me to tears. Whether I'm doing it or whether somebody else is doing it. And so I tend to shy away from it. And, part of that reason is probably 10, 15 years ago, because you were talking about the staying alive thing. Yeah. The staying alive thing was this fire safety thing. And I was going out and I was doing these presentations. And I always brought drums with me. Mm. And the one thing that I've always noticed, and this kind of references what you were saying, you can play all the technical, better yet, you can be as esoteric as you possibly can with musicians and with drummers and talking about technique and talking about time signatures and even talking about pockets. But if you can take a bunch of kids that are in kindergarten, you can play the most technically, amazingly difficult stuff, and they will just look at you because it means nothing to them. But you play George of the Jungle with a little bit of swing, and if you're playing it right, those little kids, all of them, will get up and they will dance. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a very important lesson, I think, for me, maybe in terms of my own search for the pocket. The fact that I was in situations where it was just me and a set of drums. And I realized that I could talk paradiddles, or I could talk doubles, or, we can talk time signatures, or we can even mention the word pocket, and it just means nothing to them. But play something that's familiar and play it well. Play George of the Jungle like it's the last thing you'll ever play. And they will all get up and they will dance. Wow. And, and I think I took that to the next spot. I think if you listen to a lot of all the Dummies recordings that I played on, or if you listen to many of the other recordings that I played on with the artists, I think I've probably been more concerned about where the drums are. And what I mean by where the drums are they in the way? If you're hearing the drums, then you're outshining the music and you're not doing your gig. You know what I mean? Yes. And I think that's a lot where the pocket comes in as well. Knowing where you fit in and giving that feeling of dancing. That really hits home, Mitch. As a matter of fact, just on that last point, and there's so much to take away, but while we're on that subject of are you in the way, I think that's really brilliantly put and probably throws back to what you said earlier about the pocket is not just the responsibility of one. I have a good friend who's just an amazing singer-songwriter. Her lyrics are just amazing, and her rhythms and her timing and just the way she hammers this acoustic guitar like it's a percussion instrument. Like, she's just the perfect singer-songwriter. And when she had put a band together and asked me what I thought, she had a drummer in the band who was great. But the way I described it to her is I said, your drummer is stepping all over you, because there were so many rhythms to what she was singing and then how she was hammering the neck of the guitar.
in conjunction with strumming it, and all I could hear was just muddied up drum beats over top of it, burying it in the music, and the pocket was just not there. And this girl had pocket, just her and the acoustic guitar and her voice. And when she reconstructed the band, she asked me to play, and the way I felt I was in the pocket with her was because I was giving breathing space for her to put in what she put, and I was able to fill in those gaps. Was probably one of my turning points, one of my biggest lessons I learned just from observing it in another drummer and realizing that that's part of it. So I really think you hit it on the head there. And then relating to kids, I resonate with that more than you know, Mitch, because yes, technical turnoff is probably what I'd call it. You go to an audience like that and start talking paradiddles or pocket or theory and time signatures and things like that. These are the things that turn kids off. But you play George of the Jungle with a little swing and just perfectly nail it, and you've got dancing. This all started because of a program I have called Beat Smarts, and it was my attempt to train people to play more in the pocket. And I experimented with drummers, and I had put them through these 10 lessons, and I was able to take them from just playing basic beats to playing those beats really in the pocket. And then I thought to myself, I'm like, yeah, but is it good enough? And I was like, how young could I take this? And I took 2 5-year-old students, translated notes into something much simpler, and was able to teach this to them as well. And I learned that lesson. The more simplistic and the more rhythmically accurate, and that timing, that in the pocket, like it's a feel. And if you nail it, you know it, and people know it. And I think that's the signal. Even our last guest on the show, threw back to that. He's always looking out at the audience to see, are people moving to it, or are they having trouble moving to it? Is the bass player like smiling and giving me that nod and saying, yeah, you're nailing it? Or, the other musicians tapping their feet, that kind of thing. So that's just really a major takeaway, I think, and the reason we're here doing this show. So thank you for that.
I mean, they're interesting things to talk about and get perspective of. But, reflecting off what you just said,
yeah.
I can take it one step even further.
Sure.
So in the introduction, one of the things that you mentioned was my involvement in the M&T Drummers Summer Camp. Now, you're right. I was the only single North American that was there for 4 years in a row. Mm-hmm. The other one who was there for 3 years with me is Dom Famularo. He's in New York. He's the world's drumming ambassador. If you Google him, you'll see it. But nonetheless, he would be in one of the classrooms, and he was, doing things like the Moeller technique and stuff like that. And I think that all these drummers came to this drummer summer camp expecting that we would sit down and we would be talking about paradiddles, and we'd be talking about odd time signatures, and we'd be talking about independence and playing polyrhythms. I don't know why polyrhythms always comes up, but it does. And my approach to playing with them and giving them some new experience was rather than they would come into my classroom and we would put the drumsticks down and I would get them to sing. So say, for instance, we were singing like, Well, You Needn't, or, one of my favorites is Billy's Bounce. And just because it's got a great swing to it. But the whole idea that I was trying to get them to do was I'd say, well, okay, we're going to sing the melody, and, whether you can sing or not is kind of irrelevant. But what we would do is we would sing the melody, and we would sing it again and again and again and again until it got to the point where even those who couldn't grasp the melody, who knew how it went, and if they didn't know it maybe by tone, they knew it by rhythm. And by the time that we, finished the day, it was probably like an 8-hour day, every one of those students were playing the rhythm. They were playing the melody. And I found that when they were playing the melody, when they're really concentrated on the melody, all of a sudden they were one with the other musicians in the band. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I do. You had to be, because you didn't look at your position in the band as the drummer, as the timekeeper. You were listening to the melody and you were supporting the melody. And anytime that you went beyond that, you were getting in the way. And this is really what I was trying to get across to them, right? Is that when you're sitting down, not only does playing the melody improve your hand technique and foot technique, and if you're trying to keep time but play a melody with your left hand, that it creates independence and everything else. But when you're playing the melody, it's really hard to get in the way because everything you're doing is in support of the melody, which of course creates yet another pocket.
It's funny how many things you're saying, Mitch, that are resonating with me personally, certain experiences I've had, and I'm going, wait a minute, I've had that experience before. I never even kind of noted that, but that's so true. And this is kind of why I wanted to pick this apart. I'm so glad you said that. Well, You Needn't, by the way, is a big throwback to college, all the jazz improv classes I took in the real book. And I always kind of throw back to that one with some of my friends from my jazz improv days. But it brings up an interesting anecdote. I remember one of my improv classes that they didn't allow the drummers to be on drums. They put us in front of a vibraphone and said, you guys need to learn these scales. You need to, this is improv and you're going to learn improv like everybody else. You're not going to just sit there and play swing. But one time when it just really wasn't working, everybody was just sucking wind on their solos. He stopped everybody and he took the needle off the record. He was just playing the rhythm section and everybody would solo on whatever scale or mode we were using. And he said, I'm going to point to you and I want you to scat for 4 bars and then I want you to play solo for 4 bars. And it was pretty miraculous when people were able to scat, and they weren't even that good at it. But when they had the rhythm, their solos were just tremendously better. And I'm realizing now it wasn't really the scales they were playing, it was the rhythms. And myself included, I wasn't that adept at these solos, and all of a sudden I was playing an amazing solo. And I'm going, wow, this is really amazing. It really tied everything together. So I think that's important in the melody of the song. And I think you bring up an interesting point there. In playing jazz music, and this goes for anybody who's a rock drummer, I have a jazz background, just comping and playing under the melody and behind the melody and comping the melody and sometimes mirroring it. Horn cues and things like that actually are really important. And I probably, right until this moment, didn't realize how important until you pointed that out. Another point I want to bring up too, songwriting came to mind while you were talking about that, because really when my drumming took off, particularly with regard to the pocket and evenness of timing, working with drum machines and sequencers and stuff for years definitely helped my meter, but the pocket itself really, after I started picking up an acoustic guitar and playing rhythmically and then making melodies and using words and the rhythm of words and putting it all together, really actually created the pocket for me. And coming back onto the drum kit after all that, and then being in the studio on some of my own songs, and I found the songwriting process is actually very conducive to this type of environment. I don't know, did you have that experience too, maybe?
Absolutely. I mean, I spent a lot of time working on music for movies and television series and doing all these kinds of things, as we all sometimes are blessed to be able to do.
Yeah.
And, anytime that you are looking at your instrument from another instrument, it really gives you an idea of how that instrument sits and where it sits and how it sits and the relationship between what that is and what you do. And I find sometimes that, if I pick up a bass guitar and I start playing bass, I find it sort of odd because I want to approach it the same way that I approach drums with the time. And I find, well, no, every time I do that and I listen to it, that's not the way that I want it to feel, right? And then I go back and I pick up the sticks and I start playing with it, and then I realize, oh, okay, wait a minute, I can't play it like that. I have to think like a bass player. and sometimes that's really hard. I mean, that's why good bass players are good bass players, right? Is because they think like a bass player. And if I'm playing, piano players tend to be a little bit more on top of things in general. And just the relationship of all those things, it absolutely has to make you understand where things sit. And it makes you, I think, quicker to find the pocket. In essence, I'm agreeing with you is what I'm...
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty abundantly clear. But, that leads me nicely into one of the things I really want to ask you. I found you through a very specific work. And it's funny because I was telling the person, and actually I should mention him, he's a client of mine and a personal friend. I work with chiropractors, actually weirdly enough, in some odd way, for 25 years now. And a very good chiropractor friend of mine, he's out in Scranton, Pennsylvania. His name is Dr. Manny Vito. And he's just this great guy. He's an amazing chiropractor. And also he's got this amazing pizza recipe, and all he wants to do is make pizza. But Crash Test Dummies are one of his favorite bands, and I guess I knew this about him and I had forgotten. And I was up at 2:30 in the morning a couple nights ago, and I happened to see that he posted on Facebook Afternoons and Coffee Spoons, the video. And I had only heard whatever were the radio hits back in the day. And you know how saturated the 90s were with like alternative music and that kind of stuff. So there was so much to listen to, and I had my bands that I was really into and whatever. So I would hear Crash Test Dummies and I would enjoy the music, but I never really got into the deeper cuts. And when I hit play on this video, I was like, whoa. I was like, all right, who's the drummer? And I need to find this guy. He needs to be on my show. And that just hit home as the epitome. When I hear a song like that, and I go, that's the epitome of playing in the pocket right there. I need to talk to this guy. And that's when I looked you up. So I was just curious, first of all, are there any moments or particular songs or cuts or tracks with any band, really, or any project you've done that really sticks out as when you really felt yourself playing in the pocket or establishing the pocket or collectively in the pocket with your bandmates?
Sometimes people ask me, what's your favorite song to play? And I always tell them straight up that every song that we play is my favorite song for a number of different reasons. But the one that comes to the front more often than anything else is that even though I may have played a song 5,000 times, for much of our audience, it's their first time. And so I approach it like it's the first time that I've ever played the song, and it's the last time I'm ever going to get to play the song. And so that everything that I do, nothing is on automatic pilot. Everything that I do is intended. And because I tend to play probably a little bit on the backside, and what I mean by the backside is I try to play with quite a bit of space in what we're doing. It makes it harder. And just what Miles Davis used to say, right? It's the space between the notes more than the notes. So whenever you're playing slow tempos or whenever you're playing simple grooves, to make those things like groove or let's say sit in the pocket for an entire song can be a real big challenge sometimes because I'm not deviating from the pocket, right? I'm trying to hold it down and keep it simple. Now, having said that, from God Shuffled His Feet, which is what we're touring the 25th anniversary right now. And I look at, we made that album. It was a tough album to make. We were battling record company issues just in terms of what they thought the music should be and what we thought the music should be. As an example, off the top of God Shuffled His Feet, the title track, there's that little, if you heard it, the toy drums are going, and they were, record company was coming to us and they were saying, hey, you guys are playing this tight little groove in there. And this is at the time when Annie Lennox was out with Y.
Oh yeah.
And, everything was huge and lush and super silky and groovy. And we wanted to be the antithesis of that. We didn't want to perpetuate it. Right. We said someone's already doing that. We don't want to hop on the bandwagon and just do more of that.
Sure.
Right? We want to. So we mocked it a little bit. I mean, we were looking at it and saying, we want this to be real and not just a part of what the music industry is spewing out right now. So, we played that and finding that little groove. And, we recorded that with one microphone, and I had a little set of Remo PTS drums, or the Junior PTS. And
wow.
Yeah, they're like pressed paper drums, right?
Oh my goodness.
We brought those into the studio. I actually played Boston Gardens with those drums, believe it or not. It was us and a dream.
You're making my father proud, by the way. He's a drummer. He always told me growing up, he said a good drummer can play on a set of garbage cans.
Absolutely. And
proud.
When I started doing my own thing, my big thing was, I had a huge set of drums on stage. I had a normal 4-piece kit on the stage, and then I had these Junior Pros. And I've always said it's not the drums, it's the drummer. So anytime you can show up at a gig and you're saying, "Oh, I can't play these drums," well, you should talk.
We know.
And I learned that by sitting in on gigs. And I remember being quite annoyed where I was playing a show someplace. It was like one of those bar gigs, and someone came in and sat in, and when I went back to my kit, everything was moved. Like the hi-hat was moved way over, and the snare was up, and and I vowed to myself at that point in time, I said, anytime I sit in on anyone else's kit ever, I am not going to move anything. I'm going to play it exactly the way that guy plays it. If I can't play it the way that guy plays it, then I just can't play.
I have that exact same policy. probably
Well,
for the same
I think
reason.
it's a great policy. And so when you go and if you sit in on someone's gig, right?
Yeah.
You should be able to slide in and slide out and not have any issues at all.
100%.
But anyway, so to go back to God Shoveled His Feet, we had this little simplistic thing, and then we wanted to take it up into the big lush thing, right? We wanted to move it in, if you're familiar with the tune at all, and keeping it flowing from verse to chorus, and I guess you could say maintaining the pocket, was always something I really, really enjoyed doing. And that song in particular is a fun one to play. However, to answer your question, the song on God Shoveled His Feet, which I always look forward to playing, we don't always play it because it's not necessarily a commercial hit favorite, but Two Knights and Maidens, it's a tune that's in 6/8. It's one of those tunes that flows, and when everybody is on the money, that tune, it not only does it have a strong foundation, but for me, it's kind of like it's dancing, but it's flying at the same time. And every time we play that and everybody's on, it kind of sends chills up my spine. It really does.
Wow. I have it pulled up too. I'm going to be listening to it after this episode for sure, and I'm going to make sure that's on your episode page.
And if you want to find another one that just never got into the radio airwaves, was off of A Worm's Life, and it's called Driver's Gestures. That's another tune that we must have done 20 takes on that one, just because we just, let's take it up a beat faster, let's take it a beat slower, and then boom, we found the right spot. And man, it was that kind of, when you lock into those grooves and you just never want to stop, you could just play it all night long.
I'll forget about it. Yeah.
And I guess I would have to throw another one in there. And Dan always brings us up, the bass player, because it's the one tune that we are extremely consistent in, and that it just feels great night after night after night.
Yeah.
And that is, I Think I'll Disappear Now, which is also off God Shoveled His Feet.
Yep. I'm looking at it right now.
That's another one that just, night after night after night, we drive the truck into the pocket on that one. And night after night, it just feels great. And we just, every time we hit the last note, I'm kind of like, oh, really? It's over?
I know that feeling. I'm getting that feeling as you're talking about it, like just kind of know it through and through.
You're far too kind.
Yeah. I'm not being kind either. I'm cut from the same mold, so you're speaking my language. But how about, while we're in that context, are there any pocket moments that you can think of, either in a song or a particular artist, that you felt was maybe a moment in your life or something that really turned you on?
Yeah, I don't know that I could give you one. My musical growth is quite diverse.
Okay. And
just from the mere fact that I have a lot of wonderful friends that were older than I was, who weren't afraid to say, broaden your spectrum and listen to different music. So, when I was a kid, and I was listening to Queen, and I was listening to Black Sabbath, and, Ian Pace was playing Smoke on the Water. And, for me, that was kind of a cool thing. But I don't know that it was the kind of thing that I looked at and said, that I want to emulate. But I joined a band in about 1979. But it was the same year that Asia came out.
Okay.
Steely Dan, which coincidentally is the name of my daughter. And
wow,
Steve Gadd. Playing Asia.
I have that record on vinyl, by the way. I bought it the year it came out.
Likewise, because we were playing in a band. But prior to that, everything that I'd done had been rock tunes, right? And but then we started playing Steely Dan, the Purdy Shuffle, and which to me was amazing, right? I mean, the amount of time that I sat trying to do those things, I would say that was a big zap for me in terms of. I think that was a time when the word pocket became a part of my vocabulary. And then, of course, I wish I wasn't in line with everyone else. But, when I heard Porcaro's Roseanna, right?
I was thinking about that because he mentions the Purdy Shuffle in combination with Bonham and Fool in the Rain is how he put together that Roseanna groove. And that still eludes me to this day. I still work on it and try to emulate that, as I'm sure every drummer does. But I'm so happy to hear you bring that up.
Yeah. And I remember not only that I wanted to do it, which is a great catalyst. But I loved it. I remember sitting down and listening to it and listening to how it worked with the music. And again, if you go back and you listen to it, or I think Home at Last.
Home at Last was the track, yeah.
Which is pretty as well, right?
Yes.
That's another one where the drums are doing something beautiful, but they never get in the way. They just move the thing along. So that was a big thing for me. But then, right around that same time, a friend of mine came and introduced me to, Billy Cobham, who I'm so happy to say that, a number of years ago, Billy and I happened to meet on a completely different level. Billy and I are both squash players, and we actually met on a squash court. And
there's a new one.
We became really good friends. But he was playing, I don't know if you remember a recording that he did called The Funky Thide of Sings.
Vaguely.
There was some of the tunes in there were the kind of thing where I marveled at. And I just said, wow. And it wasn't so much from a technique and the speed and everything else. It was just where the music sat. So at that time, it was also when I was getting introduced to people like Tony Williams, who had a very different kind of pocket.
Drastically.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that was between Tony Williams and Lenny White, who were very different drummers, but they brought something really different to, how the music sat. And then I discovered, Elvin Jones and Art Blakey. They all had a different place of where they put the time. You could listen to any one of them and you'd say, hey, I know who that is. And then you realize, well, wait a minute. It's like they were all like a different kind of jeans, right? They all had different pockets. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you listen to Porcaro play on anything, if you listen to any of the Toto recordings, any other drummer you could put into that situation and it would sound different. They might find the pocket and it might be really cool, but it just wouldn't have the same pocket that all those other drummers had.
Yeah,
so
good point.
In my growing, there were so many drummers that I was being introduced to, and I was never really attracted to the prowess or to the esoteric part of their drumming. It was more where they sat and how they were able to play something technically proficient, but it just moved along like butter.
I think you brought a new dynamic to In the Pocket, just on the diversity alone, just pointing that out, different types of pockets, and they're all just as valid, but they all feel differently.
Yeah, they really do. And I wish I could remember. There's a tune, John Robinson, I think it was his first solo album, on the very first track. It's got to be quite possibly the biggest pocket I've ever witnessed, ever. It is so on the money. It's just ridiculous. And he never really veers away from it. Sort of like that Chaka Khan, the Rufus tune, just the way he kind of holds it down. So, all these people were, I can't say one was more of an influence than any other. But what they all brought to the table for me was different. It was all equally great and different. I also share the same view when it comes to drummers. One of my pet peeves in life is all the drumming magazines and publications that are asking for voters to vote for the best whatever. And I always come back and I say, who could play Led Zeppelin better than John Bonham? And who could play Rush better than Neil Peart? And pick any band. Yep. And you could replace the drummer, but it'll just never be the same.
Yeah. For the same reason, if you looked at my music collection, we'd probably have a very comparable collection. There's a lot of diversity there. And when people ask me, who's your favorite band? Or, that question everybody asks, if you had to be on a desert island with one thing, I'm like, I'd probably shoot myself before I went because I wouldn't be able to pick one if you only let me pick one. It's a fate worse than death. Because it's like there's so much diversity. I'd have to have a favorite of each category. And even then, I'd probably have 2 or 3 at least. So,
absolutely.
And for different reasons. You really just took this to the next level. Wow, you said so much there, first of all. Just starting with Miles Davis and the space in between, you really hit a chord there because forming a pocket, the moments of silence are rhythmic moments, those spaces in between. Great Miles Davis quote. Although I think my favorite part of the interview so far, Mitch, is being the antithesis of Annie Lennox. I think that's going to be one of my favorite moments on the podcast. Right? I just figure that's, you know what? You have no idea how well that communicates, which, by the way, prompts a quick question. Just so you know, this guy that's hosting the show here, the 90s was my decade in terms of when music felt so alive. It just felt like it really came alive. The 80s had a lot of power and fervor, but the 90s, for some reason, were just explosive. And every time I get into that decade, I can feel that excitement. What was that like to be a pocket drummer in one of the big names in the 90s?
Test Dummies was always a bit of an anomaly in that everybody in that band, I still marvel at it today, everybody's head was screwed on straight.
Yeah.
You know, we were doing amazing things. We were flying all over the world. We were touring with Sting. We were touring with Elvis Costello. So many bands that we were touring with and shows that we were doing. And not once did anybody think that they were anything better than anything else.
Sure.
Everybody got on that stage night after night and said, okay, let's make the show the best that it can be. And every night when someone would walk off stage, if someone wasn't quite with the program, if I was tired or something like that, Dan would walk over and he'd say, hey, you know what? Every night this week, you've been doing this little fill, like just before the chorus, and you didn't do it tonight. Why didn't you do it? Right? I mean, just on. And everybody was focused on the music. And it never dawned on me until later that we had sold 10 million records at that time. I think it's up to 12 or 13 million now. But it just never dawned on me that we were in so many people's households. Because we were always kind of looking forward to the next thing. Well, what are we going to do next? What's the next album going to be like? Or what's the next show going to be? And I can tell you in retrospect that if there was ever a time to say that I'm truly grateful for anything, it's, we were in the right place at the right time, and we had a real good shot at seeing the world because we were there just before the music industry came crashing down. Mm-hmm. So I got a chance to taste not the industry like it was in the 70s and 80s when there was a lot of corruption, but there was still record companies and there were still radio stations and MTV and Much Music and all of these things, VH1. And then right around the time that we had packed it in for a little while, all that stuff disappeared.
Yeah.
And that's the birth of Napster, right?
That's true. Good point, actually. This is kind of a special episode because you're a little bit in a class by yourself. Because right now, you're out there being an inspiration to a lot of people. And I want to know where the pocket and your drumming comes into happy. I listened to Coffee Spoons. Loved it, was like, got to find out this guy. I Googled you. I started reading up on the web. And one of the first things I ran into was a video of you talking, saying how happy you are. And I noticed every seminar, I see your kit up front. What role does playing play in what you do nowadays?
When I start off those seminars, whether I'm talking on a corporate level or whether I'm talking in schools, and I really do enjoy the talks that I give in schools, mm-hmm. But one of the things that I tell them is that I am an incredibly happy and lucky individual. That's how I introduce myself. I don't come in and say that I'm this guy who's won all these awards and I've got all kinds of gold and platinum records and I've been on TV and I've traveled the world. I don't say that at all. Mm-hmm. I tell them that I'm an incredibly happy guy. And if someone were to ask me why, I turn around and I point to the drums and I say that I have been able to play drums my entire life. And I go on to tell them that I was one of those kids I was that kid in the restaurant that had the forks and the knives and playing on the plates and the glasses. And I was the one that was with the pencil on the desks in school. And, mm-hmm. At the age of 6, I remember we dropped my sister off in music lessons. And my parents asked me if I wanted to play an instrument. And I said, absolutely. And I thought it was really obvious because I was hitting things all the time. But I had to say it. I want drums. And I loved them. I really did. And I would go home at recess and I would play drums. And I'd go home at lunchtime. And after school, I was at home on weekends. But I wasn't trying to be the best drummer in the world. And I wasn't seeking fame and fortune. I was really happy and content when I was interpreting. I guess if you wanted to really get philosophical about it, I loved the idea that there was a response to an action. And when I took a stick and I hit a snare drum, or if I hit a cymbal or a tom or a bass drum, I liked that the stick produced a sound.
Wow.
By manipulating the stick, that it would give me a different sound. And my first band was me and an accordion player. He wasn't a great accordion player, but he would sit right next to me with the bellows up to my ears, and we would play what we thought was, Black Sabbath or something at the time. But there was something in the instrument itself mm-hmm. that I loved doing. Sometimes I remember people used to ask me if it was a way to get aggression out. And it never was. I've never assaulted my drums in anger ever in my life. Have I hit them hard? Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
But I speak with them. They speak to me and I speak to them and we speak together. Then I go on to talk about other things and, my musical career and stuff. But I mean, one of the reasons that I got into the Dummies in the first place was they had auditioned a bunch of different drummers at the time. And I was really busy with another band at the time. And it really wasn't happening. But I remember that we used to frequent the Blue Note all the time, and I would see Brad and Ellen there quite often. Mm-hmm. And I was just happy to play. And it didn't matter if it was 1 a.m. and if I played from 10 till 4 a.m. It just didn't matter. Yeah. I was just happy to play, and I wanted to play with anybody just because it was just so much fun to play. So where that leads to is it was a genuine, honest to goodness, happy, content to be with my instrument. Yeah. And I recognize that is something that has brought me a lot of happiness. And what I'm trying to do is give the inspiration to either, on a corporate level, but with all the work that I'm doing in the schools, very often we ask students, what are you going to do to make a living? And what I'm asking them is, well, what do you want to do? And if there's something in your life that really sparks you, that really motivates you, the thing that I could snap my fingers, and if you could do that every day of your life, what would that be? Mine was drumming, right? And I got to do it. And I still get to do it. And as you say, the drums are there, they're front and center. Mm-hmm. And they get to see the drums. They don't know who Crash Test Dummies are. They're all too young to know who Crash Test Dummies are. Yeah. And when I get specific with them is I tell them, even though that I've had a lot of success and a lot of wonderful things have happened to me, it's really irrelevant. What's important is that I've been able to do something I love for a very, very long time. And so when we finish, because they don't really know if I can play drums, right? And I mean, you have to be of a certain age to know who Crash Test Dummies are. I always finish off by doing this little thing. It's all about building up a rhythm. It revolves around a story that I had to work in the studio once without the producer. He couldn't be there. And so it was just the engineer and I, and he really knew nothing about music, but how he taught me to look at my drums differently at the time. And so it allows my audience to see that there's a degree of complexity in what I'm doing, but it's broken down so they can see what it is I'm doing. Essentially, it's a samba. It's about a little 2-minute solo-ish kind of thing, which ironically has George in the Jungle in it. And the very last words that I leave them with is, how do you think it feels for a little boy who is 6 years old, who decides he wants to play drums for the rest of his life, to be here, like today, and this is what I'm doing here in Alberta, to be here today, 52 years later, and to play for 90 seconds and get this wonderful applause that you guys just gave me. And it had nothing to do with how many records I sold. It had nothing to do with Junos or nominations or anything. It has to do with, I sat behind my instrument and I made you feel something. Yeah. How awesome is that?
As far as takeaways from this episode, we can talk pocket all we want, but that I really feel like needs to be highlighted, and I can really see the connection. That's really what makes us happy as musicians or drummers or even just artists, is that we make people feel through what we do, and that level of happiness is, some people are chasing it and they already have it.
The opposite is also true, in that I have met a lot of musicians just because I happen to be a drummer, and drummers are very communal. Mm-hmm. I've met a certain amount of drummers in my life that, the happiness isn't the motivating thing. What they want to say is that because someone has given me a set of drums, therefore that validates what I'm doing, and it means I must be good at what I'm doing. But all the drummers that I've worked with and that I've had the good fortune of hanging with, most of them are just like, having an endorsement is nice, but they know it's all about relationships and everything else. But they're happy to play, right? Yeah. And I think our endorsers see that, right?
That's it, yeah. And I think what you just described is the difference between art and not art, because you're talking about validation versus communication and making people feel something. And communicating and making people feel is art, and validation is just something else. It's not art.
Yeah. Look at us getting all heady.
I have a final question that I ask everybody. what would be a parting piece of advice, for someone to play more in the pocket? Somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I have a gig in 2 minutes. I'm about to go on stage. What's your advice for me to play more in the pocket tonight?
First of all, I guess something that you've heard many times before, but breathe. Breathing is important. Don't care about who's in the audience and focus, number one, on the people who are on stage with you. And, in our particular case, usually our bass player is our right-hand man or our left-hand man. And I always say, nail it. Play with intent. And I think when you play with intent, as soon as you intend something, your focus is 100% on what it is that you're doing. And your focus is being driven. Every note that you play, you mean it. And when you take that deep breath and you say, okay, this is the note, and this might be the last note I'll ever play. And you play it like you mean it. And then the one that follows, it's going to be the same way. And you're focused on, what is this going to be? What do I want people to feel from what I'm doing? And mean it and do it. But don't do it to satisfy anybody else. Do it because you know what's right.
Yeah.
And I think that puts the first foot forward. And at least for me, everything falls into place after that.
Honestly, that parting piece of advice to me isn't just for drummers or even musicians. I could see that sort of being advice that would be followable by the people who come to your seminars. I'm starting to see a lot more behind this pocket in terms of emotion, in terms of communication, in terms of feeling, and all those great things. Nail it and play with intent. Every note, play like you mean it. And, above all, make people feel, wow. Mitch, that's really outstanding. Thank you for that.
It's just my perspective.
And it's a great perspective. And there's so much here. I mean, in the pocket podcast.com/Mitch will be the page. I'm going to have a lot of links to a lot of the references. Mitch mentioned some bands and drummers and some Dummies tracks there that you should definitely listen to. I'm definitely going to dig into these ones that you suggested. That I think it was Driver's Gestures.
Driver's Gestures, which is off of A Worm's Life, and then Two Nights in Maidens, and I think I'll Disappear Now.
Yeah, that was the other one.
And I'm not diminishing Coffee Spoons. Fun tune to play, but for me, those are the tunes that when they finish, I'm always thinking, wow, really? Can't we play this again?
Yeah. So we'll have those on the page. And you mentioned everybody from Queen to Sabbath, and then to Steely Dan, and you hit the nerve with me with Aja. I have that right here in the studio on vinyl, and the whole Purdy shuffle thing, and then just bringing up Jeff Porcaro, speaking my language right there. Billy Cobham, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones. Also that you played squash with Billy Cobham, I thought was pretty notable and unique as well. And the antithesis of Annie Lennox definitely is sort of the watchword for the entire episode, and sort of sums up your career and the uniqueness of you and the Crash Test Dummies, actually, because I noticed that, that band really is, I can really see how it's different, and how you answered how was it to be in a 90s band in the 90s. It really put it in perspective for me to see that. So I think it's cool to point that out. I think probably one of the foremost points that you made today was how there is no cookie cutter pocket. It's almost the same thing as you saying you can't pick favorites for stuff. You can't give awards for the best this or the best that, particularly because of apples and oranges, and pockets come of all shapes and sizes and styles. Things I've read, people who've been on the show have also hinted at that. I think it's also cool to point out that I think what you're proving here, Mitch, is that drumming is applicable to life. I've always felt that rhythm and art and music is applicable to life. It is a communication medium, and it does have application outside of the stage, the studio, and, just making music and jamming. There is a rhythm of life too, and people could apply these principles whether they ever play a musical instrument or not. Mitch, you really struck a chord with me. I really didn't come out of my shell until I started playing. And at first I thought I was playing for validation, but then I realized it was how I made people feel when I played that I was really communicating for the first time. So I think that really hit home, and I have a feeling that's going to hit home for a lot of our listeners, a lot of realizations to be had, and how you never take out aggression on your drums, and that it's always playing out of happiness. And I really realize that about myself, and I think a lot of drummers will realize that as well. It might be presumptuous for me to say, but I'm willing to bet it probably wouldn't matter if you never found the Crash Test Dummies. It sounds like you would have been happy no matter the outcome. And I think that's an important lesson to learn, because when you achieve that level of happiness where it doesn't matter, you're just happy to be performing and making people feel, ironically, you kind of have to be able to take it or leave it in terms of fame and fortune. And once you achieve that and can just be happy, that you tend to steer toward fame and fortune. The bringing it down to a level of young people, not complicating things and really just getting in there to the basics and the fundamentals of groove and making people feel. And look, if you can explain something to a kid and have him understand it, then you're making an impact and you're getting through and you're speaking a language that's uncomplex. And I think you really gave us a lot of insight and a lot of things to think about. So thank you for all that.
If I could add one more thing, I think as drummers, we owe it to ourselves to listen to other drummers who we don't necessarily recognize as drummers. People like Keith Jarrett, who's a brilliant drummer. Listen to people like Chick Corea, who's also a brilliant drummer. Jaco Pastorius was a great drummer.
Yeah, he was.
There's so many people out there that are that were great drummers, but are better keyboard players or are better bass players, and so we know them in a different discipline. But they also bring something different to what pocket means as well. Yeah. Because when they're playing, for instance, Keith Jarrett, for a long time, I really think played from the mindset of a drummer. For sure, Chick Corea did, because there's a couple of albums that he even played drums on. So we can learn a lot by adopting some listening time with these people.
That's how I became a good songwriter, was because of drums, and I really believe in that. So we're at the end of the show, and I can already tell you somewhere, deep into the episodes, I'm probably going to find my way back to you to maybe ask you to come back, because something tells me you probably got a couple more hours worth of content on tap there that I think would be great to share, and we could probably go on and on. So I'd like to save some of it and invite you possibly back in the future if you'd be up for coming back.
Anytime, my friend. Anytime at all.
I would love it.
As a matter of fact, if you manage to get your bags packed and you find your way up to Toronto or Kitchener or Belleville or wherever it is that we're playing that you're able to make it to, we'll shake the glad hand and we'll take the whole thing up a notch.
I can't wait. I really think I'm going to trek up to Toronto to see you guys for sure.
By all means, want to see you there.
Yeah, awesome. And so this is usually the part where I just try to hook people up and tell them the different ways that they can follow or find you.
Obviously, through Crash Test Dummies. So you can go to crashtestdummies.com, mitchdorge.com. In terms of a lot of what I'm doing, you can find me through Facebook. That's a great place to find me, because you can always see what I'm currently doing. So if you're happen to be following me on Facebook, you get to see more or less where I am every day.
I'm sure they can go to crashtestdummies.com and find out all information on the band if they want to follow there. And also, I'm going to have as much as I can on your episode page, which again, inthepocketpodcast.com/Mitch, MITCH. And we'll have all kinds of links there to those websites and to other places and references that Mitch and I made during the episode today. And obviously, as I get deeper into your catalog, I'm going to be adding more and more there. We'll have some notable quotes. There's so many to choose from. It's going to be one of the longest episode pages ever. But that's also in a good way, Mitch. So I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. Folks, do follow Mitch. He gave you his Facebook and the 2 websites, and definitely check him out. Try to catch a show when he's playing around, and I can tell you it'd be highly worth it. And of course, your fail-safe is if you ever need information, you can get in touch with me directly through my Instagram @FrankiePockets. And you can DM me there with any questions that you have, and I am very good about answering those, so please do reach out. And also, if you know someone who should be on In the Pocket, send me a DM on Instagram and let me know. And I'm always looking for that next great guest, which is great. Although, Mitch, I have to tell you, it's going to be hard to top you. An inspiring episode. You've definitely molded the show a little bit more here. So I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, how much I appreciate having you here and how much of a solid you did by just being here. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Frank.
And to you folks, thank you very much for being here in the pocket with me. I am having a blast doing this. As you know, this was a dream of mine for quite a while to be doing this, and I finally just took the bull by the horns and said, you know what? I even quit a band to get this show on the road. And I am having the time of my life doing this. Wait till you see who I have in the hopper. I have been reaching out like crazy, and I've been getting some positive responses and things like that. So there's lots more. So please keep tuning in and downloading. Go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating if you care to, and perhaps a review as well. And this show is available in many other formats on Android and so on. If you go to inthepocketpodcast.com and you click subscribe, you will find all the different ways to tune in. As always, I've enjoyed having you here, so please stay tuned and get in there and get in that pocket. Mitch Dorge gave us tons more insight into that today, and we're ever more closer to its true essence. So good luck to you in your drumming and playing, and I will have a throne pulled up for you waiting right here next time in the pocket. Be good. The In the Pocket Radio Podcast is a broadcast wellness production powered by BeatSmarts. Executive producer, Frank Sardella. Copyright 2017, all rights reserved. For more information, visit inthepocketpodcast.com.